ChristineHarris.com.
"Can you give me a piggyback ride, please, Daddy?" the girl inquired from his right. A gleaming smile on her face, her curly black hair flowed over her shoulders, cascading onto her back. A small dimple formed around her cheek when she smiled, the same way Clementine's dimples formed. He then realized Louis was kneeled down beside her, and a similar grin on his lips. "Of course, kiddo," said Louis, presenting his shoulders to the girl. With some effort, she clambered onto his back and the man rose, making her squeal of joy. "Don't fall down, okay?" he said. "Then don't drop me," she giggled, taking a hold of Louis's dreads with her small hand. Louis walked forward through the forest, the afternoon sun shining up above them. Birds chirped as they passed, the girls' squeals bringing them out from their nest. Louis avoided low-hanging branches, skipping over fallen tree trunks and balancing the girl on his shoulders. As they soon found themselves in the clearing, he stopped walking, raising his arms to lower the girl onto the ground. A guttural growl erupted from a walker on the one side of the clearing, and its one arm flailing in their direction. The girl let out a yelp and hid behind her father. Her tiny hands clenched his trench coat. Pulling its fabric down, he had cast a protective arm around her and retrieved his knife from his hand. "I got it," he said, charging at the moaning creature with a full force and plunging the knife deep into its skull. He turned and smiled at his daughter, whose face lit up. Louis noticed that she had small clusters of freckles cascading from the cheeks and way down her neck. He approached her, pocketing his knife. "That's what's so cool!" she exclaimed, balancing on the balls of her feet. "Could you show me more of that sometime?" "You got it, kiddo," he promised, ruffling the girl's curly hair. Her amber eyes closed and chuckled escaped from her. A soft rustle of trees on their right caught Louis's attention. He pressed a finger to his lips and shaking his head at his daughter. She nodded. He crept forward with the knife in his hand, and as he got to the bush, Louis slapped away from a sizable branch. A mouthful of dirt began to dug up inside the plant, dark spots lying around the surface. Raising an eyebrow, he slowly reached for the mound and began brushing away the excess dirt. He got a glimpse of a deep blue underneath. He frowned, kneeled down, and dug up the rest of it, and he gasped. Clementine's hat was lying on the ground in front of him, with a familiar splash of blood on its cap, and its fabric was torn. He blinked a few times in his head. "What the?" he muttered, slowly reaching for the hat. Then he turned it in his hand, examining it for clues, but had felt nothing out of the ordinary, other than the fact that it wasn't on Clem's head. "Hey, what do you think?" He began, trailing off when he turned around to see no trace of his daughter. He stood up and looked around. Clem's hat gripped firmly on his left hand. The clearing was just as he found it. The exception of the 6-year-old amber-eyed girl had been found beside him not 2 minutes ago. Louis called for her, cupping his hands in his mouth. After minutes of screaming, he realized there was no answer forthcoming. Right as he was about to give up, he heard a voice. It came from the woods, whispering unintelligible things to him. Frowning, he started to strain his hearing to locate the source of the voice. He could not find it. As soon as seconds passed, the voice drew closer and the whispering became more tense, and he was able to discern a few words. Pathetic, good for nothing, waste of space. As the words floated in his mind, he gasped and realized then who the voice belonged to. "Dad?" he whispered, looking around, clutching the hat in his hand. "Is that you?" he asked, scanning the trees. The sun above then began to fade. Black clouds covering the sky as the voice became louder and clearer. "You, a father?" a booming voice mocked, making Louis tremble. A cold gust of wind nearby blew Clem's hat away from his hand, and he slowly walked forward. "What kind of a joke is this?" the voice continued. "Stop it!" Louis exclaimed, looking around for his father. "Where are you?" he yelled in the wind. The breeze picked up the speed. "You don't even know where your little girl just went now," his father jeered once more. "How could you expect to raise a child when it's actually time? "Well, we'll figure it out like we always do," Louis shot back, willing his legs not to give up under his weight. A booming laughter filled his ears, making him flinch. "You mean Clementine will figure it out?" the voice jeered. while you're off being for good-for-nothing slacker. Shut up. You don't know what we're doing. Wait, Lewis roared. I know you, Lewis, his father sneered, the wind becoming stronger as he spoke. Pathetic, weak, incompetent. His father's words rang in his ear, drowning out the sound of the roaring wind around him. Stop, he kept saying, closing his eyes and shaking his head. Stop it! Oh, come on, stop! Lewis, the voice whispered into the wind, concealing the tone of it. Lewis! The man kept his eyes shut as the chanting became louder. His knife had forgotten on the ground, and Clementine's hat clutched firmly on his left hand. He shook his head fiercely until a different voice broke through his thoughts. It was a sweet voice, calling out to his name softly. Lewis! She kept saying. He felt a tight pressure on his shoulders, and he opened his eyes. Lewis sat up with a gasp, cold sweat clinging from his forehead. He was in his bed in Richmond, several candles lighting the room. His breathing was still uneven, short bursts of air leaving through his mouth every few seconds. Clementine sat beside him, her brows tightly knitted. Baby, she whispered, placing a hand on his bare shoulder. Are you okay? I don't know, he muttered, rubbing his eyes fiercely and blinking several times. That was a weird dream. Nightmare by the looks of it, she commented, gesturing to the blankets on their bed. The fabric sprawled everywhere. She straightened up, crossing her arms. Want to talk about it? Taking a deep breath, Lewis retold his dream to Clementine, sparingly, in no detail. She smiled at the idea about dreaming them about their child. He told her about the walker and his daughter encountered and their reaction to it. He went into detail about her appearance, the way the curly brown hair flowed around her moment, and the golden hue of her eyes. It seems like you're describing the younger version of me, she interrupted, a smile tugging at her lips. She looked very much like you. Yes, he concealed, chuckling. Why ruin the perfection after all? He added, a smug grin on his face. Clementine blushed, looking away and brushing the strain of hair away from her face. Continue. He frowned and shrugged, struggling again to remember the details what came after that. His memory was in a haze, and he could only remember the hearing of his father's voice, recalling his dad's words as best he could. He finished talking and slumped onto his shoulders. He lied back on his pillow, closing his eyes. Clementine took a moment to process the information, and then followed his lead. She laid back down next to him, placing a soft hand on his chest. She usually did this at night. She enjoyed doing this the way his chest rose and fell with his breathing, which seemed to calm her down after her own nightmares. You shouldn't listen to your father, Lewis, she whispered, nuzzling her head on the crook of his neck. He's not around anymore, and you're a grown man. I know, but he was right anyway, he countered clumsily, wrapping his arm around her shoulder and kissing the top of her head. He most certainly wasn't, she argued, shaking her head. You're much more important than you can give your credit for. I know neither me nor AJ would have had made it this far without you, she assured him. You're just saying that, he muttered. I'm not, she said, rolling her eyes. After a moment of silence, an idea occurred to her. I could prove it, she said, smiling. How's that? Without saying a word, Clementine reached up for Lewis's right hand and took it to hers. She felt the warmth that overcame to her whenever she was with him. She smiled as Clem guided his hand down and it eventually placed it on her abdomen. Her belly had begun to swell slightly. A small bump was forming. She saw Lewis's eyes open wide. Is that? It is, she confirmed, chuckling. This is your baby, Lewis. Our baby. Never think that you're not loved to be appreciated by all this. By Lewis, Jr., she added reluctantly, making Lewis gasp and in French about the stutter of her name. You just used that name, he whispered, grinning smugly. I was making a point, she argued, rolling her eyes. You're just the love of my life, Lewis. I just hope that you realize just how much that means. He looked down at her, tears threatening to fill his eyes, and smiled. His thumb drew circles over Clementine's belly, making her skin shiver. He could feel his baby's presence inside. Doubts that were still clouding his mind, but the thoughts of his baby and Clementine slowly replacing them with the familiar warmth of his filling body. I love you, baby, he said, placing a tip of her nose a kiss. And I love our baby. He added, wiggling down so that he'd be close to the baby bump on her stomach. Clementine watched as he caressed her baby, her tears filling her amber eyes. I'm going to take care of both of you, he continued. I'll look after you with every inch of me being. I'll give me life for you. If I have to, he whispered, looking up in the loving gaze of his wife. She stuttered, chuckling. That was beautiful. You're beautiful, he countered with a smile. He leaned forward, closing the breach between their lips. His hands cupped her face, deepening the kiss as Clementine arched forward. He began planting soft kisses on her neck, making Clem sigh. I love you, Clementine, he whispered, and his hands roaming her back. At the break of dawn, Clementine found herself at the gate of Richmond. She had a bow that Javi had given her in a hand, and a small leather quiver strapped onto her back. Due to her swelling stomach, she adopted to wear baggier shirt over just to keep her over than her usual tank top. It was way still too early to tell people. Gabe was waiting for them, and a heavier assault rifle hung over his shoulder. The guards took at her coming signal and started opening the gates for them. You're late, said Gabe when she caught up to him. Yeah, sorry about that, she said, blushing. I caught up, though. Don't worry about it, he dismissed, leading her out of the community and led into the streets adapted downtown. Broken cars littered the streets, and most of their doors on the hoods had been corrugated after years of disrepair. The rising sun casted long enough over the shadows of the pair, making them seem larger than they were. After 20 minutes of walking in silence, they got to the edge of the forest when their unique hunting was done. The fence had divided the grounds into small wooden gates on the lodge. Gabe opened the gate for Clementine before closing it behind them, and they ventured up into the wilderness. Clementine held the bow firmly in front of her with the search for wildlife, while Gabe scanned the perimeter. As the wind picked up, the leaves on the trees rustled overhead. Gabriel made a point to single out the spots that they've already visited previously, as not to overhunt them. We make a very good team, he commented as they stepped over a fallen tree 2 times what they're with. We do, don't we? She agreed, offering Gabe a small smile. When they heard a twig snap ahead of them, Clem pressed her finger to lips. Up ahead, 40 feet, she whispered, drawing an arrow above creeping forward. She was careful not to step over the fallen leaves. Scanning the tree line for movement, a blur of brown caught their attention on their left. On the tree branch was about 8 feet off the ground was a squirrel, in its tiny hands grasping a nut. She aimed her weapon on the animal, taking a deep breath before releasing the arrow. The metal tip pierced through the squirrel's neck, blood squirting now from the wound, and the pair traced forward, examining for their first kill. Not bad, said Gabe, nodding and fastening the tiny animal to his belt. Thanks. They kept on the same routine after that. While Gabriel checked for threats around them, Clementine's keen eyes scrounged the ground and trees for meat to bring back to their home. Every now and then they would find a mushroom or berries that Eleanor had given them all clear to correct and to collect them before eating them. 2 hours later, they had obtained a total of 7 squirrels and 10 sizable sparrows. About noon, they arrived at the clearing, which was worthy of a lunch break. Gabriel set his rifle against the trunk, exchanging it for an apple they brought back for nourishment. Clementine did the same. Good hunting today, he complimented through her mouthful of apple, making Clementine chuckle. Thanks, she said, nodding. And thank you for having my back. My pleasure, he assured her. As they ate the silence after that, basking in the peacefulness of nature, birds chirped from the trees, a mellow song of their composition. The wind had been subsided at this point, replacing it with the sweltering heat of mid-spring. Sweat clung up to Clem's forehead, and her curly hair sticking to her skin. She took off her hat, placing it neatly on the trunk as she sat on, and wiped the droplets of her sleeve. It's way too hot today. I need to tell you something. They spoke in Unlation. Neither they were spying up for a few moments later after that. Clementine raised an eyebrow, biting onto what was left over of apple. Sure, what is it? He started searching for the words that wouldn't come. You remember when we met, right? Taken back by the question, Clementine nodded slowly. Yeah, when I helped Javi save your ass back at the junkyard, she teased, making the man chuckle. Exactly, he said. Well, I don't know if you knew about this, but I had a major crush on you at the time. He let the words come out of the rapid string that Clementine had trouble keeping up with. I actually knew that, she whispered, looking away. You did? A twig broke a few feet away from them, and they went to see a small squirrel skipping past them. Clementine dismissed it as an animal and then turned back to Gabe. Yeah, Javi told me right before I left you guys, she explained. Pagano, the man muttered as he sighed and looked at Clementine in the eyes. Well, I still do. You still what? She repeated, blinking fast. I'm still in love with you, he whispered, looking down. Clem stood silent for a few seconds, proceeding the information. Gabe's still in love with me? She thought incredulously. Crossing her arms, she frowned. You know I'm married, right? I know, but you and I both know we make more sense than you guys, he exclaimed. To Clementine, she scoffed. Excuse me? Well, we've known each other for longer, and we've had quite a few in common, he explained, finally looking up at Clem's eyes. Much more than Louis and you do anyway. I can't believe you'd say that, she spat, standing up. She swiped the hat off the trunk and swiftly put it on her head with a final glare in the Gabe's direction. She turned and stormed off into the woods. Gabriel clumsily got to his feet and went after her, catching up to her and grabbing her arm. Wait, Clem, I'm sorry, he said. The woman slapped his hand away from her, putting her hands on her hips. Leave me alone, Gabe, she said, suggested, her tone dangerously low. I just need some time to think. Respecting an order, Gabriel backed off and let her storm off deeper into the woods. He just stood there, watching her walk away, and cursed himself. Walking back into their makeshift camp, he sat down beside with his rifle full and buried his face in his hands. Stupid Gabriel, he muttered. I'm still in love with you, idiot. He upbraided himself. He contemplated on what happened on his little stunt, trying to come up with a way to make things right. With every possible outcome he foresaw, none had helped his situation. He sulked for a few minutes, respecting Clementine's wish to be alone. Maybe this is just for the best, he thought. Now you know she doesn't want you. Yeah, but now she might hate me, he countered. His rambling thoughts were cut when a piercing scream tore through the forest. He got to his feet and ran in the direction of the sound, his rifle secured in his hands. That came from Clem's direction. He realized with a jolt, and he was willing to go faster, zigzagging through the trees and the shrubbery. He arrived clearing at this much smaller than the fast. Looking around, he saw no signs of a struggle, although through the trees he could see that there was no one at first glance. Whoever had been here had seemingly vanished into thin air. He stepped forward, and suddenly stopped in his tracks when he spotted the only clue they had left. Clementine's hat was laying on the floor by a thin tree. Its owner was nowhere in sight. Clem? He asked, breaking the silence. It seemed, however, that there was no answer forthcoming. Clementine!
Why, hello there, my little pretties. It's me, the Shadow Lioness. I hope you all enjoy my video of creepypasta. So, without further ado, if you liked the video, please leave a like. And if you want to survive my cave of terror, please hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Donate to my Patreon when you can. And the only way you're going to survive me in the cave is you're going to have to sub to me and press the bell for notifications so you'll get to know when I upload. Well, without further ado, my little pretties, I'll see you in the next video. Sweet dreams, my little pretties.